Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to Seed Speaks. This is a video series that is brought to you by Seed World Group. My name is Marc Zienkiewicz, and I am an editor with Seed World Group, and I'm happy to be your host today. This month, we are talking with people from across the industry about challenges in the realm of human resources. Today, we're talking with two experts about the issue of remote work, which has been a big topic over the past number of months for obvious reasons. We're going to talk about how people in our industry are impacted by this whole remote work discussion, how you can deal with questions surrounding remote work, and what the future holds. I'm joined today by Doug Miller, Executive Director for the Canadian Seed Growers Association, based in Ontario, Canada. Hello, Doug. And also Spike Craven, President of Iowa's Integrity Communications. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of remote work, I'd like to just learn a little bit about each of you. Doug, what is your story and what does Integrity Communications do? And maybe while you're explaining that, I love that painting in the background. It's very agriculture oriented. Just curious what the story is behind that.
So I'm gonna take that. I think Doug, he was referring actually to me. So I'm gonna run with that. Uh, Thank you, Mark, and thank you
Spike, yes.
for that's okay. Thank you for having both Doug and I today to weigh in on a topic that certainly has been on everyone's mind and will continue to be as we figure out where things are at, especially as it relates to the seed world, and no pun intended, and agriculture. So it's ironic that we're here having a conversation about working remotely, and my internet in my office actually went down yesterday. And so I am now at a remote facility, one that I'm fortunate enough to have access to, that also supports agriculture to a great degree. And so you can see here the painting that is so eloquently done uh, behind my left shoulder. That is the father of modern agriculture, as many of us know, Norman Borlaug. And it's a privilege to be standing just with him over my shoulder delivering a message about agriculture, yet I've done so many times in this room. And it's interesting as we continue to evolve here as as an industry. uh, we look at agriculture, that's a pretty broad umbrella, but specifically in seeds, we look from the laboratory to the agronomists to commercial, and folks that are actually uh, really hand to hand and pressing flesh, or at least used to, with the grower. And I work with all of the aspects of an agriculture organization. We focus not on the message that they deliver, because that's what their internal communications department is for. Yet we work on the structure and the delivery of their message, and just how they're doing that most effectively. And that certainly has changed in terms of the way that we're providing advice to our clients, because if you're not in a the commercial space, or you're not in the research in the lab, and somewhere in between, chances are you've been confined to your home, or something that resembles your home, an office space that is not your office. And so we've really helped organizations to adjust to that, and how it is that they best get their messages across in a virtual world, and bringing them to an understanding that the way that you did it once in person, that isn't exactly going to parlay over to a virtual situation. And so we now have virtual programs that we're working with our clients through, that help them to refine those virtual skills, but also the hybrid skills. And I know we'll get into that here as well in terms of where we see things going, but that's a little bit of an overview of who I am and what we do.
Well, thanks, Spike. Welcome to the show, and thanks for the background there with regards to the painting. That situation perfectly illustrates the topic that we're discussing today: remote work. And what do you do in a situation like that, where you have a meeting coming up, and all of a sudden, oh, my internet service went out. What do I do now? So, such is life these days.
Yeah, and
Doug,
the
the
first thing
real
is wipe your sweat off your brow when that happens, Mark.
yeah, that always works for me. So. Thanks. Welcome again, Spike. Sorry I called you Doug. The real Doug. We're going to talk with the real Doug now. Welcome, Doug. How about you? Who is Doug Miller? And for those not familiar with it, what role does the Canadian Seed Growers Association play in the Canadian seed industry?
Thanks, Mark. Really great to be here today talking to everyone. I'm the new executive director at the Canadian Seed Growers Association. CSJ is a national seed crop certification body and a standard setting body as well. We work really closely in Canada with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to deliver our mandate. Annually, we certify between 1.2 to about 1.3 million acres of seed across the country of about 50 different crop kinds. We're a grassroots organization with about 3,000 members coast to coast. At CSJ, we've really embraced the digital first mindset, which has really helped us during the COVID pandemic and helped facilitate our transition to a remote work model. Over the last number of months, as I've become the new ED at CSJ, we've actually been going through a transition where we've looked at our office space and we said, you know what, there's a new way to be able to do this. So we're looking at transitioning from a traditional office space to a hybrid model. So looking forward today to talk to you about my experiences.
Well, welcome, Doug. Moving over to this issue of remote work, I'd like to know how you've both been impacted by remote work in your own personal lives. Starting with you, Doug, how has this whole remote work thing impacted you on a daily personal level?
Yeah. Well, Mark, I've been a remote work warrior now for about 5 years, and I've done it in multiple different environments and scenarios. I've lived and worked out of 500 square feet in a downtown city center. And I've also been one of these people you've heard about that is leaving the downtown to greener pastures in the country. I've also been a member of a team that's been working remotely, and the only one on that team that is remote. And now I'm transitioning to a leadership role where I'm now helping a team move through or transition to remote work. So I will say, working remotely now is very different than working remotely prior to the pandemic. Now I feel that there's this sense that we're all in this together. We're all working remotely, and it's great. It does have its challenges, but it feels very different. Prior to the pandemic, where you're the only one or a part of a small team working remotely, you can get pretty isolated. Sometimes you feel like you're out on an island by yourself. And it's very different. Some days I'd work at home, sometimes I'd go to a shared office, shared workspace. But as how my day-to-day has been impacted, it hasn't really changed. I'm still doing what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And in saying that, I understand that comes with a lot of privilege. I'm very privileged to be able to work this way, and I know a lot of people aren't. And so we need to be able to find a way to be able to move everyone forward.
Yeah, exactly. And moving forward and developing a plan for that is something we're going to get to in a moment. Spike, how about you? Other than your internet going out yesterday and having to find a place today to do our talk from, how have you been affected personally by the whole remote work discussion that sort of started when the COVID-19 pandemic began?
Yeah, I won't lie to you, it's been an absolute challenge in that 100% of the work that my organization did with our clients was in person. And when all of a sudden we can't be meeting in person, that poses a grave danger to my business, to my family's livelihood, that which I really thrive in having the chance to do. And I resisted it, I'll be very honest, for some time, and thought this is going to pass. We don't need to pivot. It's all going to blow over. We eventually came to the understanding, as many did, that that was not the case. And so we did make a significant investment in really changing, or rather adding to our business model, where we were able to work with our clients in a more digital way, a more virtual way than we ever have before. Ultimately, it's going to afford us the chance to work with clients that maybe we wouldn't have even had the fortune of working with before. We did do some international work previously. I don't know when that will come back, but because of the virtual offering that we've invested in and created, it will afford us the chance to work with India, Japan, Singapore, Brazil, our clients in those spaces where we I can't fly to. Organizations aren't letting their own employees fly into those places, let alone an outside consultant. So it's been a challenge, yet it has provided opportunity at the same time. And as any entrepreneur would tell you, that with challenge comes opportunity, and that's what we've had to look at this through the lens of.
What are you guys hearing from the seed industry specifically? You both work every day with people who live and breathe seed. Spike, what are you hearing from people in the American seed industry in terms of challenges they're facing with remote work that are unique to what we do in seed specifically?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and so I'll keep this as brief as possible in terms of how, from what I've seen, is this impacting our clients in the industry. I'll start on the side of commercial. Those seed representatives that are out and responsible for meeting with growers. We have one organization that we work with, and they said blatantly to their folks, staying in is not an option. We still have to be present in front of that grower because they're going to put something in the ground, and we have to be in front of them. And so this particular client, for example, created something called truck to truck, which was you stay in your truck, you're on that operations property. Maybe you roll the window down and they're in the tractor, you're in the truck, or at least there's a hood's distance of that pickup between you and the grower, to maintain social distancing, physical distancing, that kind of thing. But to not have folks on the commercial side out in front of these growers was simply not an option. On the other hand, you have folks in research, and that has been, in my experience from the clients that we have, a bit of a struggle, because not everyone is back in the lab unless it's something that's mission critical. There's a lot of folks in research that don't work in the lab, and they work in cubicles, and they've now been confined to their homes. And there, from what I've been told, is an unfortunate disconnect, because you don't have those water cooler discussions. You don't see people in the hallway. Now, what I will say is, over the past 16 months, there's been a lot of adaptation to that, yet it's still not the same. I wish I could say that it's all unicorns and rainbows at this point in time, and everything's going to be the way it was. But adaptation has truly been the key to moving forward.
Well, what about you, Doug? What are you hearing from members of the Canadian Seed Growers Association in terms of challenges that they've faced?
Yeah, absolutely. So our members are operating seed establishments from coast to coast, and depending on the size and scope, they have a lot of different activities ranging from growing, conditioning, processing to the selling of that seed. You know, last time I checked, growing seed, you can't do that remotely. So there's a lot of challenges here for our members on how they're able to go about their day-to-day while balancing that fine line, you know, moving forward about making sure that everyone's safe. Safety is top of mind. And I know a lot of our seed producers have put in plans in place to be able to protect their customers and also themselves. But, you know, throughout the year, we did hear of stories and firsthand about, you know, some outbreaks at seed farms. So luckily through the pandemic, CHJ and the work that we do was considered to be essential. So we were able to kind of maintain our work, but we had to adapt and we had to change and we had to pivot. Like a lot of some of the checks and balances that we have in seed certification are done manually and so or person to person. So we had to put in new digital tools to be able to facilitate the transferring of that information digitally. I think whenever you're looking at like it from an organizational perspective, you just can't flip a switch and expect everyone to go remote. You just can't throw them in and hope that everything is going to be okay. Hope is not a strategy when it comes to remote work. You need to be able to have a framework in place that's able to provide support to your employees. One of the key things, you know, is communication. Communication. Like hyper communication is key within a remote world. And you know, in the future, you're going to be hearing like synchronous or asynchronous communication. It's going to be a wild frontier. But it's about having a playbook or a set of rules and engagements for your employees to be able to move forward. And you know, as an employer, you also have to set your employees up for success, not just in terms of the framework for communication, but also how they work. You know, giving them the right tools. You know, you equip their office in their cubicles with standing desks or monitors and things like that. You also need to be thinking about that in that remote world. You know, I have flashbacks or nightmares to the beginning of the pandemic where like my remote office was taken away from me. We had a new child arrive at the beginning of the pandemic. I wasn't able to get outdoor office space. So I was literally spending most of my days working on a flipped over bassinet, or you know, using an ironing board in my living room as a standing desk. Not great, but you know, it worked. But we need to be thinking about how we can be able to move these forward. One point, you know, that I've heard a lot from our members and a lot of the industries is that, you know, remote work is one thing, but remote meetings is another. I think, you know, and just because you're working remotely doesn't mean that meetings don't happen anymore in person. So, you know, I think there's a desire to work remotely, but also go back to those in-person meetings, but also finding a way to be able to have more people participate in those meetings. You know, through virtual, it's great to be able to see more people participating. There's more equal access to these meetings. So it's how do we find a way to kind of bring all these things together?
Well, that's a good point, Doug, because I think like when this whole thing started, I think there was some people maybe thought, oh, so and so gets to work from home. They must be really lucky to do that. There was sort of this idea that, you know, working from home was this great thing and that it was easy, and it's definitely not. And we actually have a question from our audience about this in terms of the stigma that maybe in the past was attached to working from home, that people thought, well, if you're working from home, that, you know, maybe you're not working as hard as somebody who's in an office, for example. And I'm going to open up the floor to you guys here. Is that still the case? Is there still a stigma attached to remote work? Or, you know, after all these months now, do you think that we've sort of arrived at this general consensus in our society where people understand that, you know, working, just because you're not in an office, working remotely is really the same as working anywhere else? What do you guys think?
Doug, you mind if I jump in here?
Go for it.
There's a lot to unpack there, Mark, and we don't necessarily have time to unpack all of that. Yet what I would say is some folks may still retain a stigma about, well, you get the chance to work at home, I have to go back to the office. What we need to remember is when we're working virtually, it's not the same as working in person. When we have a 4-hour in-person meeting, you can't do that virtually. You can't have a 4-hour virtual meeting and expect the same results. Why? It's called Zoom fatigue. And there's already plenty of research out there to support that. And so I might even argue that that person that works from home, they maybe are more fatigued and more pressured than that person that is afforded the opportunity to come into the office. Doug, you mentioned something that we talk with our clients a lot about, especially with regard to the services that we offer, and that's synchronous and asynchronous. What can be done synchronous, meaning in person as a group? What can be done asynchronously to make the best use of those individuals' time who are working offsite or remotely? And it's critically important for organizations to understand we are probably going to have a meet in the middle where it's not a full on from home and it's not a full on back to the office, and we're going to have an understanding of both of those environments. But to take exactly what was done in the office and to immediately just transfer that over into a virtual environment, it's ill efficient.
And, Mark, as someone who has worked remotely as kind of like the only person in an organization, it is very, it's a tricky one because, sometimes you do feel out of sight, out of mind. You're not there for those water cooler discussions that happen impromptu. But, I think through the pandemic, it opened up everyone's eyes to, what remote work is. And, it is tough. There is Zoom fatigue, but it also there's a lot of challenges with working remote. One of the ones that I struggle with is kind of this on demand all the time, use these tools like Slack or Teams, and you're pinged all the time, and it's just really hard to be able to get core work done or uninterrupted work. In the past, in an office environment, you could shut your door and people would know, oh, Doug's busy. But now it's like, I don't have a door to shut, right? The gatekeeper is that Slack interface or Teams, and there's no real way to shut that. And so I think moving forward, it's about establishing boundaries and establishing a playbook, and it's all embedded within your company's culture about how you interact in this new digital world. And in terms of like the stigma, they're not doing as much work, or they're sleeping in, or they're watching TV during the day, or folding laundry. I think that's part of performance management. As a manager or as a leadership team, it's about setting clear goals and objectives for your teams. And if you're going to be able to see who's working and who's not, like a lot of people that I've experienced in my life that were not doing a heck of a lot in the office, but they were there in seat. So I think it's just a different way of thinking about things and being clear and accountable for actions.
Doug, I love the word that you use in terms of the expectation. You've used that a number of times, and with our clients, that's what we're working to help them with as well, is to establish what are those expectations. Because you're working from home doesn't mean that you can show up on your Monday morning 8 a.m. Zoom call in a t-shirt and bedhead. You wouldn't show up to the office in that. Because you're working remotely doesn't give you the excuse to do that. Yet for some, that expectation hasn't been clearly established. Now, we might think that that's common sense, but for many, it's not common practice.
No, I was part of a Zoom call where someone was laying in bed. They were an employee of mine, but it's just, you got to show up the way that you would in the office,
100%.
And if it doesn't,
Yeah, well, sorry, go ahead, Doug.
Go for it.
No, I was going to say, yeah, it's important, to set people up for success, obviously, by giving them clear guidelines in terms of working from home and how to do that in a professional, productive way. And are there any other tips that you guys have for setting people up for success with remote work? If you have an employee who needs to work from home, are there specific things that you can do to sort of ease that transition for them so they don't make any of those mistakes, so they can just sort of get right into it and be clear on, this is how it's going to work?
an easy one to say, and maybe it's just kind of a business buzzword, but work-life balance. In a remote environment, wherever you live and work out of your home, it's important to have clear guidelines on the balance, work-life balance. And whenever I became ED, I had a meeting with my staff, and I made it very clear, that work-life balance was important to me. I have a young family at home. It's about setting those. It's very easy, to be checking your email all night, even whenever you work, like in a traditional office sense. But it's just about setting those boundaries and creating clear lines of distinction. I don't come into this room unless I'm working. This is my working room. And that's how I'm able to do it. I don't check my phone for emails at night, because this is where I work, and I'm able to notice that once I walk out that door, I'm at home. And it's about creating that clear boundary.
And I would agree 100%, Doug. And we've talked about this already before offline. But I think that setting those parameters is incredibly important. I think that it was important before, when we all had a traditional workspace, yet now that the work and home can be great, that's important to more specifically define what that line is. What I continue to share with the clients that we work with, though, is that when you're on, relaxed and unengaged is not an option. Your organization and the key stakeholders that you're engaging with are deserving of far more than relaxed and unengaged. And that's what a lot of people assimilate to working from home. I can be relaxed and unengaged or disengaged. And that simply should not be an option.
Yeah, and that goes, sorry, go ahead, Doug.
You say a call comes in, and all of a sudden the client hears a beep in the background. Oh, don't worry about that. It's just my popcorn. I'm just popping here. Like,
well, and that
going off.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what you were saying, Doug, about how work-life balance, how do you work that? If you need to be engaged at home and you're working from home, and how do you ensure that you maintain that work-life balance so that you can turn on and turn off when you need to, right? And so, yeah, the challenges are many, and we could go on all day. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for the day, so we will have to continue another day. This is one of those great topics that you can go on and on for a while. There's definitely, as you guys said, a lot to unpack here, but I think we had a great solid discussion. I hope you, our audience, enjoyed it today, got some useful pointers for how you can handle this in your own business. If you missed a part of today's live stream, don't worry, we'll have it available on demand via Facebook, YouTube, and on our websites. We'll also have a written article posted to our website soon. If you have any questions about this subject or ideas for future topics we should tackle, please simply message us via social media. Doug and Spike, thank you so much for your great insights today.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for the privilege.
And please join us next week for our 4th episode of Seed Speaks. Same time, same channel. Have a great day, everybody.